The 1990s were a hell of a time to be a wrestling fan, being fortunate enough to witness a revolution in this wonderful world of glitter and spandex, a revolution which would change the entire pro wrestling landscape, and one which would continue to be felt all the way to the modern day. The fluorescent lights of the 1990s in WWF had begun to flicker out. Fans were growing ever more tired of the peroxide blonde all-American hero, inevitably overcoming the odds on their way to gold and glory. As the final few neon bulbs began to dim, one man and his anarchic band of merry men grabbed that fluorescent tube and smashed it over the heads of their audiences. From the darkness climbed the counterculture of the time. Young men and women were sick of living in this sanitized world created by their parents and started to rebel. With this new generation came a desire for something more visceral, more realistic, and altogether more extreme. ECW's impact on professional wrestling cannot be understated. Its commitment to authenticity, creative freedom, and innovation in both in-ring action and storytelling can be seen in the continued influence it has on the industry today. The positives of ECW laid in its ability to revolutionize wrestling, elevate underrated talent, and cultivate a passionate fan base, making it an essential chapter in the history of the sport. However, a company that was so committed to pushing boundaries and playing on the very edge of public decency and morality was also destined to step across that line at some point. In this video, I want to see how Extreme Championship Wrestling was formed from the ashes of the National Wrestling Alliance. Through hard work, revolutionary thinking, and more than a handful of deception, I will see how ECW became an answer to those young people seeking something fresh and exciting from their weekly pro wrestling television show, and how the darkness, which once was the birthplace of a systematic change within the industry, eventually became the same darkness that would destroy it.
Welcome everyone to the Wrestle Pod. Subscribe now for more pro wrestling and pop culture content.
Yalla Bush Bear.
Nee, brother, a Russian bear.
Russian bear is incredible. Who could bodybuild with love? Not me.
Free bodybuilding program from Val Vasilif with purchase.
ECW Barely Legal 1997 was an event that nearly never happened. Held on April the 13th at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, it marked a pivotal moment for Extreme Championship Wrestling, overcoming obstacles such as cable companies' refusal to associate with the controversial promotion and technical difficulties caused by the venue's limited power supply. Barely Legal secured a provider at the 11th hour. Despite these setbacks, the show pressed on, delivering an unforgettable spectacle that showcased the raw athleticism, brutality, and devoted fan base that forever changed the professional wrestling world. Under the visionary leadership of Paul Heyman, ECW had emerged in the late 1990s as a renegade promotion that shattered the conventions of traditional wrestling, seeking to provide a grittier, more realistic product. ECW resonated with a growing contingent of fans who craved an alternative to the formulaic style offered by mainstream promotions at the time. Barely Legal 97 represented the culmination of this feeling and of ECW's journey as the company's first ever pay-per-view event. The defining characteristics of ECW Barely Legal 97 was the electric atmosphere inside the ECW Arena that night. The passionate and rabid fan base the ECW had cultivated infused an unparalleled energy into that event. The fervour of the crowd, combined with the intimate venue, created an intense and immersive experience for both those in attendance and the viewers watching on television at home. Barely Legal boasted a stacked card featuring a mix of ECW regulars and notable talents from other promotions. The matches showcased the extreme style that had become synonymous with the brand, incorporating high-risk maneuvers, violent encounters, and an unprecedented level of intensity. The event marked a turning point not only for ECW, but also for the professional wrestling industry as a whole. The event's success, both critically and commercially, demonstrated the viability of the alternative wrestling scene and initiated a shift in the landscape. It laid the foundation for ECW's subsequent rise as a major player in the business, whilst inspiring other promotions to embrace a more innovative and daring style of wrestling. ECW Barely Legal 1997 stands as a landmark event in the history of the business.
ECW is a concept taken from what Terry Funk started many, many years ago. And that concept is, if the people pay their yen, their dollar, to see this event, they go home and say, that event was worth more than what I paid for it. I'm happy I spent my money on that event. If I spend 50,000 yen to come to the match, I would have spent 100,000 for that show.
In early 1998, Shane Douglas was still the reigning ECW World Champion and the top of the card within the company. However, when Douglas suffered an injury which meant he was unable to defend his belt, calls from other wrestlers in the company came for him to relinquish the championship. When Douglas refused, it caused frustration backstage, most notably with the number one contender Taz, who kept demanding the belt be passed to him. In May, Taz decided to take the problem into his own hands and came out to speak to the ECW fans about his rightful place as world champion. The original belt that Taz brought to the ring was simply the ECW television title with the leather strap changed. On close-up, you can even make out the stickers that Taz and backstage production used to cover the word television with FTW and Taz logos. Even later, when Taz was presented with a more professional belt by Rob Van Dam, the FTW Championship was not recognised as an official title by ECW or other wrestling promotions, but that was all part of the charm. Instead, it was referred to as a symbolic or unsanctioned championship. However, this would not stop Taz from constantly harassing the officially recognised champion, attempting to goad Shane Douglas into a match. With his intense persona and expert use of a countless number of suplexes, Taz endeared himself towards the rabid ECW regulars. The human suplex machine didn't care about any official title anymore and had broken away to find success on his own, a reflection of one of the core fundamentals of early ECW and a clear parallel to Shane Douglas's approach to the NWA belt a few years prior. However, the belt only ever served as a stepping stone for Taz and others who held it during this period. I don't think that if you go back into the history of ECW that the FTW world title meant that much. I think in the history of ECW, the FTW title was a launch towards Taz's push towards the World Heavyweight Championship. After crowning 3 champions during its initial run, the FTW belt was eventually abandoned in 1999 when it was unified with the ECW World Championship. For over 2 decades it remained inactive. However, in 2020, the FTW Championship found new life when it was reintroduced by Taz in AEW. Both in ECW and AEW, the championship was introduced when the respective world champions were unable to defend their titles due to injury or illness. In ECW, Taz himself was the challenger, while in AEW, it was Taz's client, Brian Cage. It carries a rebellious aura, signifying defiance against the established hierarchy. Taz's real-life son even had a run with the FTW belt in AEW, defeating Ricky Starks in 2022. ECW Heatwave 1998 is widely regarded as one of the most iconic and memorable events in the history of Extreme Championship Wrestling. Known for its intense and hardcore style, ECW Heatwave 1998 showcased the promotion at its peak and featured several standout matches and moments. Heatwave 98 was an exceptional event that showcased the very best of ECW's hardcore style and intense wrestling action to a much wider audience. It had a strong lineup of matches with standout performances from lots of wrestlers on the card. The event captured the spirit and energy of the company and left a lasting impression on fans of the promotion to this day, still being revered as an absolute classic.
ECW アメリカマット界の中で今最も注目を集める団体であるサブー・サンドマンらが繰り広げるエクストリームなファイトでメジャーをも脅かす存在となったこの団体の仕掛け人がこの男である。
So, at this point in time, ECW had become the darlings of the independent wrestling scene across North America. VHS tapes and DVDs spread the Extreme Company's message far and wide. Through internet forums and numerous fan-written blog posts, the company had gained an aura of excitement. a brand with both eyes firmly on the future and with some of the brightest talents in the industry boasted on their ever-improving roster. Paul Heyman was leading ECW through one successful wrestling event, through weekly television, and onto ever more popular pay-per-views. And the young wrestling genius was seemingly about to fulfill the potential that so many had seen in him from a young age. In 1999, Paul Heyman entered into a 3-year contract with TNN, aiming to raise national awareness of his company.
And indeed, starting Friday night, August 13th at 8 p.m., we're on TNN!
Extreme Championship Wrestling features extreme violence. The emphasis on violence is keeping ECW from gaining any local television outlets and syndication. Station managers are shying away from the brutality, leaving ECW to several regional sports channels and Channel America, the network of Channel 16. But Heyman is not fazed. If it's working with the fans, Paul will go with it, says Dave Meltzer. You may not like the amount of violence in the show, but those fans in Philadelphia do. In August of 1999, ECW made its national broadcast debut on the Nashville network, despite the absence of advertising or an increased production value. Prior to ECW on TNN, ECW events were only televised through syndication. TNN, looking to capitalise on the growing viewership of teenagers and young males attracted by Roller Jam.
Fear is his sacred weapon. Punishment his true companion. Pain his sole agenda. Mark D'Amato of the New York Enforcers is the most dangerous man on skates.
I am the dominant figure in this league. I run this league.
Added ECW to its Friday Night Thrill Zone. The addition of ECW supposedly contributed to a significant boost in the network's young male demographic on Friday nights in the early 2000s. Initially, this opportunity seemed like a chance for ECW to compete on a major scale. However, the deal turned out to be a nightmare as the network's involvement began to harm the product. The relationship between the two, ECW and TNN, showed signs of strain when TNN President David Hall suggested that the program should be toned down from its usual extreme style. Obviously, ECW was known for its more violent matches and explicit content, distinguishing it from the leading professional wrestling companies of the time. Paul Heyman has since claimed that TNN's request to tone down ECW's content was excessive. The show Raw moved to TNN in September of 2000, coinciding with a major rebranding of the channel as the national network. During a live on-air promo, Paul Heyman expressed his displeasure with TNN, accusing them of neglecting his company by not promoting the show and threatening legal action. Despite rumours of a possible coexistence between WWE and ECW on TNN, 2 weeks later, Paul Heyman's company was cancelled. Heyman believed that TNN used ECW as a test run to gauge wrestling performance on the channel, a sentiment shared by former ECW wrestler Jerry Lynn. So now, Paul Heyman had lost his lucrative slot on national television and all of the financial stability that came with it. He could have cut back on the ECW roster at this time and saved cash on some of the larger contracts. He could have toned down the excessive production in his shows and saved money on pyro, flares and fireworks. Perhaps he could have gone into the bank and attempted to receive some kind of financial assistance. But instead, Paul Heyman made the most ingenious and logical next step imaginable. He went straight out and spent all of the rest of ECW's non-existent money, with no way of ever paying it back. We had enough in the budget to last us to the first major event that I completely scripted, which was the November to Remember. If that show didn't completely sell out, the promotion would have folded. That got us enough of a budget to last to February, which ended up being the night the line was crossed. If that show didn't sell out completely, and we sell a certain number of t-shirts and videotapes, we wouldn't have been open the next day. Literally, it was a struggle to survive every day. ECW has never had a broad-based syndicated television lineup because of its violent content, and has had to rely on regional sports, cable, and low-power networks to gain access to the US audience. Yet, the Extreme Circuit is perhaps the most loyal and rabid, albeit much smaller fan base of any mat organisation. Heyman took over 4 years ago from the late Eddie Gilbert as booker of the Philadelphia-based group, and immediately began playing to the band of hardcore fans who have predominantly cheered for villains for years. As part of that, ECW carved out a niche as an anything-goes circuit. Backstage brawl leads to firing of the Gangsters. Extreme Championship Wrestling's team of the Gangsters, who were part of that controversial race-baiting angle in Smoky Mountain Wrestling last year, were fired Friday night after a real-life backstage brawl in Jim Thorpe, Philadelphia. New Jack, half of the Gangsters team, allegedly began the brouhaha with ECW newcomer Dudley Dudley and reportedly took a baseball bat to Dudley. Eyewitnesses say eventually half the dressing room became involved. ECW booker Paul Heyman fired the Gangsters Wednesday. Let's hope ECW doesn't come here. Extreme Championship Wrestling, the small Philadelphia-based promotion of Paul Heyman, has turned into a cult favourite and played to 2 turnaway crowds, one in Queens, New York, and in the 1,500-seat bingo hall where ECW regularly calls home in Philly. However, the 2 sellouts come on the heels of another in the endless series of controversies involving this group. Less than 2 weeks ago in Allentown, Philadelphia, a melee erupted involving Shane Douglas and a fan. According to eyewitnesses, a fan took a swing at Douglas as he was leaving the ring. Moments later, several other fans became involved, and ECW's Bubba Ray Dudley and Tommy Dreamer were keeping fans separated from Douglas. Perry Saturn of the Eliminators tag team tackled one of the fans who had jumped Douglas. Heyman spent the following Monday issuing public statements attacking the Allentown Arena officials for providing inadequate security and suggesting that Douglas may press charges against the fan who originally swung at him. Earlier in the same show, a fan threw a drink at ECW's Rob Van Dam. Van Dam went after the fan and ripped his shirt off. I'm not surprised at any of this, nor will this be the last time these kind of wrestling fan confrontations occur. I'm periodically asked and receive email from people who want to know when ECW is going to be booked at a show in Columbus. I hope never. In my view, ECW has gone beyond the cutting edge. A minority of wrestling fans seem to enjoy this, but this is a slice of wrestling we don't need here. In January of 2001, the Extreme Championship Wrestling promotion was in a state of disarray. It was plagued by severe financial troubles resulting from poor business decisions, as well as the continuous departure of its top talent to rival companies WWE and WCW. The Guilty as Charged pay-per-view event, held on January 7, 2001 at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York, marked a significant turning point for the company. It would be the last event produced by Paul Heyman and the original ECW, and their home away from home in New York would serve as the perfect venue. It was a major league venue in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, and yet it had the same feel to me as the ECW Arena during the height of the promotion. It was intimate enough to maintain our aura, and large enough to turn a tremendous profit and fund the company. Had ECW continued operations, the Hammerstein was going to become our base. This broadcast would serve as the final farewell to the beloved original cast and format of the company, as it would undergo major changes thereafter.
And for that, I promise you, we are guilty as charged!
The centerpiece of the event was a groundbreaking encounter, known as the Tables, Ladders, Chairs and Canes match, a first and only in the history of ECW. The match was fought for the prestigious ECW World Championship, with Steve Corino putting his title on the line against the Sandman and Just Incredible. In an astonishing turn of events, the Sandman emerged victorious, claiming the championship after climbing the ladder to claim the belt. However, his reign was short-lived, as he immediately faced a determined challenger in Rhino, who would come out and threaten Sandman's family if he wasn't given an immediate shot at the new ECW title. Surpassing all expectations, Rhino managed to dethrone the Sandman, delivering a wicked gore through a table, and seized the coveted ECW belt for himself. With the championship in his possession, Rhino issued an open challenge, inviting any worthy competitor to step forward. Rob Van Dam fearlessly answered the call, ready to test his mettle against the best. But before the encounter could unfold, Jerry Lynn ambushed Van Dam, igniting an impromptu clash between the two foes. In an intense showdown, Van Dam emerged triumphant, showcasing his resilience and skill. This electrifying confrontation epitomized the rebellious spirit that defined the Renegade Company, delivering a fitting conclusion to the era of the original and independent ECW. However, behind the scenes, things were completely falling apart. The nature of the impromptu match between RVD and Jerry Lynn was in fact due to a dispute over pay, with Paul Heyman yet again falling behind on his employees' contracts. There was a big controversy based on money between Lynn, Rob Van Dam and Paul Heyman about doing that final show. Jerry didn't even bring his boots because he was owed so much money. I believe he used Scotty Riggs' black boots and black biker shorts for the match, signalling a reduction in their pay-per-view schedule. However, unforeseen circumstances abruptly altered these intentions. Surprisingly, the fate of ECW took an unexpected turn after a house show in Pines Bluff, Arkansas, which was held on January the 13th, unexpectedly becoming the promotion's final show ever without prior indication. As the weeks progressed, ECW encountered more setbacks. In February, news circulated that the highly anticipated Living Dangerously pay-per-view had been cancelled, leaving fans disappointed and uncertain about the future of the promotion. Then, on March the 5th, a bombshell announcement shook the wrestling world. Paul Heyman, the leader of ECW, stunned audiences by making a surprising appearance on Monday Night Raw. This unexpected development witnessed Heyman reunited with his former WCW colleague Jim Ross as he stepped in to replace Jerry Lawler, who had recently resigned from the WWF. Heyman's unexpected transition to Monday Night Raw left the wrestling industry, not to mention the ECW locker room, abuzz, with speculation, anger and intrigue surrounding implications for both ECW and the WWF. The surprising reunion of Heyman and Ross added another layer of anticipation and uncertainty to an already tumultuous period in professional wrestling. ECW goes too far with DUI stunt. What has my hackles in an uproar is a late-in-the-show storyline involving ECW Sandman, who was injured while trying to interfere in the bout. Sandman was taken by ambulance to a hospital, but the script had Sandman taking the ambulance hostage on the way. While driving on the way back to the War Memorial Arena in Fort Lauderdale, ECW made an amateurish attempt to follow the ambulance via helicopter a la O.J. Simpson's Bronco. Sandman stopped off at a convenience store to pick up a couple of six-packs of beer. Announcers Joey Styles and Lance Wright repeatedly made comic reference to Sandman drinking while driving through the streets of Fort Lauderdale. Sandman is a popular performer with a large pack of ECW's followers. What kind of message does this send to them about the behaviour in a promotion where success is measured by the number of tables a wrestler can break in one night? I wonder how Dave Brown feels about something like this. Until January of this year, Brown was the long-term announcer of Memphis-based USWA Wrestling. You may remember detailing the death of his daughter and granddaughter in May at the hands of a drunk driver. Somehow, I don't think Dave Brown's laughing about ECW's storyline, particularly when he is becoming a public advocate for tougher DUI laws. At some point I have to wonder, is there no new low for pro wrestling?
This other brand out there, and why not incorporate it?
ECW had introduced a new and innovative style of professional wrestling that differed from mainstream promotions like WWE and WCW. It combined elements of traditional wrestling with high-flying maneuvers, hardcore, and a gritty, more realistic presentation. The extreme nature of the matches, along with the innovative storyline and characters, appealed to a niche audience looking for something different. The popularity of the company had begun to explode due to the prevalence of tape trading back at the time, and as the irons were red hot, Vince McMahon saw the opportunity to strike. On July the 9th, 2001, wrestling fans of Extreme Championship Wrestling witnessed one of the most dramatic moments in the history of the brand. The episode of Raw, which was held at the Phillips Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, featured a series of shocking events that changed the landscape of the company forever. The night started off innocently enough, with Kane scheduled to face Mike Awesome and Lance Storm in a handicap match. However, things took an unexpected turn when Chris Jericho came out and offered to be Kane's partner, turning it into a tag team match. Near the end of the bout, Jericho applied the Walls of Jericho on Lance Storm, but just as the crowd thought that Jericho and Kane had the upper hand, Rob Van Dam and Tommy Dreamer ran through the audience and into the ring, launching a surprise attack on Kane and Jericho. In response, WWE wrestlers consisting of the Dudley Boys, Taz, Just Incredible, Rhino and Raven ran to the ring to aid their WWF colleagues. After a brief standoff, the WWF cavalry turned around and attacked Kane and Jericho as the fans realised that they were all former ECW wrestlers, prompting Paul Heyman to leave the announce table and enter the ring. Heyman high-fived the wrestlers and announced that ECW has been brought into the invasion. And I feel like adding and injecting ECW into the mix and into the alliance, it made it more interesting for sure. Was it done perfectly? No, it wasn't, because it would have been much better if people that would have been viewing this program went, oh well, those are all different entities. There's WWE and they're taking on WCW along with ECW. Heyman talked about how he had grown tired of sitting beside Jim Ross and discussing WCW versus WWF, stating that he felt that everyone had forgotten about his company. He then announced that this invasion just got taken to the extreme. This shocking turn of events had the crowd on the edge of their seats, wondering what would happen next. At the end of the night, the WWF wrestlers entered the ring. The WCW wrestlers came into the ring, accompanied by Shane McMahon. And before ECW entered, the WCW and WWF wrestlers started to brawl. The WWF roster cleared the ring, but then were stormed by the ECW combatants and taken out. The WCW fighters then came into the ring, high-fived the ECW men, and then dismantled the WWF wrestlers, and announced that ECW and WCW merged to form the alliance, with Stephanie McMahon as ECW's new owner. This shocking announcement left fans in disbelief, and many wondered what would happen next in the world of wrestling. Many of the existing storylines were put on hold as the focus shifted to the rivalry between the WWF and the brand new alliance. I thought it was okay, considering it was, and I hated the way the invasion was played, where WCW didn't have its own show, it didn't have its own platform, and WCW guys were constantly on WWE programming. There was a point where every match was like WWE versus WCW, and I feel like it never had the feel of a dream feud or dream program that it should have had. For fans of ECW, news of their financial struggles going into the new millennium may have come as somewhat of a shock. After all, the company was putting on more wrestling events in bigger, more prestigious venues than ever before. They had managed a run of well-viewed and critically acclaimed pay-per-view shows and were seemingly set to continue their meteoric rise. However, to anyone who had been unfortunate enough to engage in a business relationship with Paul Heyman at this time, the total collapse of the company was always only a matter of time. ECW had faced financial difficulties through its entire existence, but eventually in 2001, the magnitude of the debts accrued by Heyman and the company became apparent. ECW's financial struggles were primarily attributed to the high cost associated with running a professional wrestling promotion and the intense competition within the industry at the time. The company operated on a much smaller budget compared to its mainstream counterparts such as WWE and WCW. ECW relied heavily on its passionate fanbase and innovative storytelling to differentiate itself in the highly competitive wrestling landscape. Throughout the late 90s, ECW experienced significant growth in popularity and critical acclaim, largely due to its unique presentation and emphasis on a more extreme and gritty style of wrestling. However, the company struggled to convert its cult following into substantial financial success. Despite various television deals and pay-per-view events, ECW often faced challenges in securing consistent revenue streams. One of the major setbacks for ECW was losing its television deal with TNN in 2000. The loss of this national television exposure limited ECW's reach and ability to attract new viewers and sponsorship. This setback, combined with increasing debts, led to the company filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in April of 2001. Under Chapter 11 bankruptcy, ECW attempted to reorganise its finances and continue operations. However, the company faced insurmountable challenges and was unable to secure the necessary funding to sustain its operations. As a result, ECW's assets were stripped. Following the bankruptcy, WWE would involve themselves in a long process to acquire the rights to ECW's video library and intellectual property. During the bankruptcy proceedings, the financial reports from Paul Heyman and the ECW holding company HHG Corporation became public. This is where we see with undoubtable proof that Heyman's wise-talking, manipulating of the facts and risk-taking behind the scenes had hidden the true financial collapse of the company, as his borrowing had grown to astronomical levels. Alongside this money owed to RVD, the owner of ECW also owed Tommy Dreamer, Rhino, Shane Douglas, Francine, Don Callis, Super Crazy and some other wrestlers almost $300,000 in contractually obligated missed payments. Joey Styles, a passionate supporter of Heyman and a crucial part of the company's success, was personally owed more than $50,000. But it wasn't only the on-screen talent that had not been paid by ECW. Paul Heyman had made great strides towards increasing the production value of his live shows, but at a huge cost. He owed 9 different production companies in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Chicago and Atlanta, an amount totaling more than $500,000. He owed the owners of the Madison Square Garden venue $250,000. In total, HHG listed debts of $8,881,000, which doesn't include the unknown amounts owed to some workers or allowed for the settlement of the 13 pending lawsuits and other potential litigation.
In 2004, after finally purchasing ECW's assets from a bankruptcy court, WWE released The Rise and Fall of ECW, which tells the wild story of the alternate promotion's carnal history. The documentary is such a success that WWE follows it up with ECW One Night Stand on pay-per-view. In response to the Rise and Fall documentary, many ex-ECW wrestlers felt that they had not been given the chance to express their side of the story by WWE. After all, Vince McMahon's company had only used interviews from wrestlers they had signed on their roster at the time. The likes of Shane Douglas, Raven and Sandman had all been instrumental in the growing success of ECW, but were all absent in WWE's newly released documentary. So an unlikely figure emerged in order to shine a light on the other side of the company's past. Jeremy Borash, a man who started his career as a commentator in WCW and then went on to have successful spells with TNA and now WWE, stepped up. Alongside the Big Vision Entertainment Company, Borash not only produced the Forever Hardcore documentary, but to coincide with its release, began organising a wrestling reunion show. On June the 10th, 2005, the first ever hardcore homecoming event took place at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, the spiritual home of ECW. This means that the event occurred just 2 days prior to the WWE's ECW One Night Stand 2005 show in New York City. Before the events, a fan tailgate party was organised outside the former ECW Arena, with several wrestlers making appearances. This gathering harkened back to the 1980s era of territorial wrestling, when independent promotions would often host barbecues before and after the events. The main event of the show was a 3-way dance match between Shane Douglas, Terry Funk and Sabu. This match was highly anticipated as it showcased 3 of the most iconic figures in ECW's history. Other notable matches included a steel cage between Raven and the Sandman, a tag team match between the Dudley Boys of Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon and the Gangsters of New Jack and Mustafa Saeed, and a 4-way dance match for the ECW World Television Championship. The event also featured several memorable moments and surprises, including the return of the former ECW owner Todd Gordon and the emotional tribute to ECW wrestler Chris Candido, who had passed away earlier that year. None of the former ECW performers who were under contract with WWE at the time appeared at the Hardcore Homecoming event. However, Mick Foley was not signed to the WWE, made a surprise appearance. The event featured former ECW ring announcers Bob RTC and Stephen DeAngelis, as well as a former ECW referee John Finnegan. Hardcore Homecoming received positive reviews from both fans and critics alike. It captured the very spirit and nostalgia of the original ECW, and provided an opportunity for fans to relive the excitement and passion of the hardcore wrestling era. ECW One Night Stand 2005 is undoubtedly one of those landmark events. As a resurrected and nostalgic homage to Extreme Championship Wrestling, this pay-per-view was held in June of 2005 at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City, became a rallying cry for die-hard fans and a testament to the enduring legacy of the brand. Following ECW's closure in 2001 due to financial struggles, fans were left yearning for the unique experience it had offered. ECW had developed a loyal following that appreciated its unapologetic and boundary-pushing approach to pro wrestling. In the years that followed, a cult-like fervour grew amongst wrestling enthusiasts, creating a groundswell of nostalgia and a desire to see their beloved promotion resurrected, if even only for a night. The Hammerstein Ballroom was chosen as the venue for the event due to its historical association with the company. As fans entered the arena, they were greeted by an atmosphere brimming with energy and anticipation. The intimate setting, combined with raucous crowds, primarily composed of original ECW faithful, created an electric ambience that felt like a throwback to the promotion's glory days. Signs, chants, and a palpable sense of excitement permeated the air, setting the stage for an unforgettable evening. ECW One Night Stand featured a mix of classic ECW matches. The next year, WWE did it all over again at ECW One Night Stand 2006, which was also held at the Hammerstein Ballroom. For a second year, it was a testament to the enduring legacy of ECW. Many fans dressed in old ECW merchandise were transported back in time to relive the rebellious spirit that defined the company. The event seemed to breathe new life into the world of pro wrestling, reminding fans and wrestlers alike of the importance of pushing boundaries and embracing the extreme. One Night Stand 2006 delivered on its promise of showcasing extreme wrestling at its finest. The event featured an array of memorable matches that paid homage to the promotion's legacy, whilst continuing to introduce a new generation of fans to its unique brand of entertainment. Iconic matchups such as Rey Mysterio vs Sabu, Edge and Mick Foley clashing in a match that really pushed the limits of physicality and storytelling, and of course, one of my all-time favourite pro wrestling matches ever, John Cena vs Rob Van Dam.
After winning the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 22, Rob Van Dam challenged incumbent WWE champion John Cena for his championship in an Extreme Rules match at the upcoming ECW One Night Stand. And what a night to remember! Originally, any member of the ECW brand who held a world championship, either the WWE Championship or the World Heavyweight belt, would have the title changed into the ECW World Championship as long as it remained on the brand. Each match was characterised by high spots, brutal chair shots, and the unrelenting passion of the wrestlers and fans. ECW One Night Stand 2006 holds a special place in the history of professional wrestling. Beyond being a nostalgic celebration of the past, the event played a significant role in influencing the future of the industry. The resounding success of the show led to the revival of ECW as a fully fledged brand under the WWE umbrella. This resurgence allowed new talent to flourish and provided a platform for innovative and unconventional wrestling styles to thrive. The event also served as a reminder that alternative wrestling promotions could compete and capture the hearts of fans on a global scale. Not only did everyone in the Manhattan Ballroom all really get behind everything that I stood for, because they knew bringing ECW back was my idea, they knew back in the day that I brought ECW up to new heights. Not only were all the fans pro-RVD in the extreme, at the same time they were all against everything that Cena stood for. The demise of ECW made me probably more disappointed than anything else related to wrestling in my career. Just 2 days following Rob Van Dam's victory over John Cena to claim the WWE Championship at the second ECW One Night Stand event, WWE made a significant move by introducing ECW as a separate brand on the Sci-Fi television network. On the premiere episode of WWE ECW, Paul Heyman presented Rob Van Dam with the ECW World Championship as a replacement. However, Rob Van Dam decided that he instead wanted to hold both belts simultaneously. Van Dam would lose both championships in the same week in the following month, the WWE Championship to Edge and the ECW World Championship to The Big Show.
The new program showcased beloved ECW icons such as Sabu and the Sandman, alongside prominent WWE superstars like Big Show and Kurt Angle. Its debut proved to be a massive success, quickly soaring to the pinnacle of the network's rating charts. Nonetheless, as time passed over the course of the next 4 years, the original essence of the Extreme brand gradually eroded, diminishing bit by bit until it eventually merged into the vast sea of World Wrestling Entertainment. ECW's revival on Sci-Fi, which took place from 2006 to 2010, has often been seen as a disappointment and ultimately a failure. Several factors contributed to this perception. The ECW brand had gained a cult following for its rebellious, hardcore style of wrestling, featuring intense matches, extreme violence, and blood. When ECW was brought on Sci-Fi, it was heavily toned down and sanitized to fit within the constraints of mainstream television. This departure from the original spirit of ECW seemed to alienate many of its passionate fans who were drawn to the promotion for different reasons than what Sci-Fi could provide. The revival failed to capture the authentic essence of the company. The original ECW was known for its gritty and intimate atmosphere, often held in smaller venues with passionate fans. However, the Sci-Fi version of ECW was produced within the confines of a larger WWE production, losing the intimate feel and raw energy that made the original ECW so special. The creative decisions and booking decisions for the ECW brand on Sci-Fi were also often criticised. The roster largely consisted of new talent who were unfamiliar to the ECW fanbase, and there was a lack of compelling storylines and character development. Many of the established ECW stars who returned for the revival were underutilised or poorly booked, which further frustrated fans and diminished their interest in the product. The ECW brand on Sci-Fi faced stiff competition within the WWE itself. The flagship shows Raw and SmackDown were already established and had larger audiences and more recognisable stars. As a result, the ECW brand struggled to stand out and differentiate itself, leading to a lack of viewership and diminished interest from within WWE itself. By the time ECW was revived on Sci-Fi, the landscape of professional wrestling had significantly changed. The edgy and extreme style of wrestling that ECW had popularised in the 1990s and carved out a niche with had become much less mainstream. The appetite for the extreme had waned, and fans were now more interested in different styles of wrestling, focusing on athleticism, in-ring storytelling, and larger-than-life characters. These factors combined to create a product that failed to capture the passion and excitement of the original ECW, ultimately leading to the downfall of the brand on Sci-Fi. WWE ECW December to Dismember was a pay-per-view event that took place on December 3rd, 2006, under the rebranded WWF ECW. The event was held at the James Brown Arena in Augusta, Georgia. It is worth noting that the event received significant criticisms and is widely regarded as one of the worst pay-per-views in WWE history. The Extreme Elimination Chamber match for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship. This was the main event and the match that gave the event its name. The participants were The Big Show, Bobby Lashley, CM Punk, Test, and Hardcore Holly, none of whom had ever even stepped foot in an ECW ring, and Rob Van Dam. The match concept was intriguing, but the execution fell flat. The crowd was seemingly uninterested, and the eliminations felt rushed and anticlimactic. Bobby Lashley emerged as the winner and became the ECW World Champion. Overall, December to Dismember was heavily criticised for its lacklustre matches, poor booking decisions, and an overall lack of excitement. The event failed to live up to expectations and didn't deliver the quality that fans had come to expect from either WWE or ECW pay-per-views. It is considered one of the most disappointing events in the company's history. The event had a weak lineup with matches that lacked star power and compelling storylines. Many of the matches were hastily put together and lacked the build-up necessary to create anticipation amongst fans. Despite being promoted as an ECW event, it failed to capture the spirit and essence of the original company. The event felt more like a watered-down version of WWE's main roster programming, rather than the edgier and hardcore style that ECW was synonymous with. The absence of key ECW superstars such as Sandman and Sabu in prominent roles was a major disappointment for fans who expected to see the iconic ECW roster showcased. Instead, the event relied heavily on wrestlers from WWE's main roster who didn't necessarily fit the ECW mould. The match quality and booking decisions were subpar, the matches lacked excitement and failed to engage the audience. The Extreme Elimination Chamber match, which was meant to be the highlight of the event, suffered from rushed eliminations and a lack of drama. One cathartic moment did come, however, for the performers of ECW in April of 2007. More than 80,000 WWE fans began chanting ECW as ECW took stage at WrestleMania, with Joey Styles and Taz calling the action on commentary. It's a huge moment for all of the performers who had been with ECW for so many years, who started out in front of a few hundred fans in a bingo hall in Philadelphia and were now front and centre on the biggest stage in the wrestling calendar. The match at WrestleMania 23 was popular with fans and served as a way to give some of the longest-serving members of the company the ever-important WrestleMania moment. During the final episode of ECW on Sci-Fi, a significant turn of events unfolded. In an Extreme Rules match, Ezekiel Jackson, under the guidance of William Regal, emerged victorious over Christian, seizing the ECW World Championship. It was an electrifying moment that marked the end of an era. Unless WWE ever decides to resurrect the belt once again, Ezekiel Jackson, known as the personification of domination, will forever be etched in the record books as the final ever champion. However, behind the curtain, the unpredictable nature of Vince McMahon persisted, and several sources reveal that Paul Heyman, unlike other agents and writers within the company, refused to cower during McMahon's notorious outbursts. On December 3rd, Heyman and McMahon engaged in a heated clash regarding the December to Dismember pay-per-view event and its booking. The tensions reached their zenith the following day in North Charleston in South Carolina, described by an eyewitness as a highly intense meeting. Subsequently, Heyman was asked to leave and reportedly declined WWE's offer to continue working behind the scenes in developmental. At this time, it was never made clear if Heyman's contract expired, he resigned, or he and WWE reached a discreet agreement to part ways. Mr. McMahon aggravated the state of distress by making the decision to send Heyman home, citing declining television ratings and a discontented roster of talent. The WWE chairman justified Heyman's dismissal. In February of 2010, the ECW brand was officially dissolved, and those performers signed to the Extreme branch of WWE were either absorbed into SmackDown and Raw or released. The frustration by Paul Heyman and the men and women that had been brought with him to WWE was palpable backstage. Many felt that Vince McMahon had not delivered on his promise to create a new future for the dying ECW and felt trapped by their contracts, working somewhere they didn't want to be. 5 years later, in November of 2015, the Dudley Boys, engaged in a fierce rivalry with the Wyatt family, orchestrated the return of Tommy Dreamer on Raw, leading to the formation of a fresh iteration of the ECW originals. 2 days later, on December 2nd, 2015, the group made a captivating comeback by introducing the returning Rhino on Raw, who joined forces with them to combat the Wyatts. Subsequently, on December 13th, during the TLC pay-per-view event, the ECW originals faced off against the Wyatt family in an intense 8-man tables elimination match, where they suffered defeat. The following night on Raw, they encountered the Wyatts once more in an Extreme Rules match, but again, unfortunately emerged on the losing end. So, once again, the presence of ECW in WWE was mismanaged, mishandled, and fizzled out with little fanfare. As time progressed, the presence of the ECW originals gradually diminished from WWE television, ultimately fading away by 2016. To take a closer look at Vince's opinions on the original ideas of ECW, we need only look at one of the first times he was in control of a storyline featuring an ECW wrestler, when in April of 2000, on an episode of SmackDown, the human suplex machine Taz, who was then ECW World Champion, appeared to take on the WWE Champion Triple H. Now, with Vince McMahon, the man responsible for the outcome of the match, saw WWE and ECW as equals at this time, then surely we'd see a competitive match between the two companies' top stars. But no, of course not. Taz looked tiny compared to Triple H, and even smaller inside of the enormous squared circle of WWE. It was a complete mismatch from the start, showing that Vince McMahon wasn't ever intending to take Taz or any of his colleagues very seriously, sending a message to the WWE fans that they shouldn't either. Taz obviously lost when he was accidentally attacked by Tommy Dreamer, making the pair look as stupid as they did insignificant. So little did Vince value the ECW brand and its world title that in 2007 he made himself the Extreme Championship World Champion, changing his persona to mock the ebonics of urban life in Philadelphia and New York, even wearing a do-rag alongside his belt, and delivering one of the cringiest lines in all of pro wrestling history on live television.
Keep it up, I'm a nigga!
Vince McMahon's relationship with ECW, both the original promotion and the revived brand, is complex and multifaceted. While it's difficult to pinpoint specific personal reasons or feelings, there are a few factors that may have influenced McMahon's perspective on the company. ECW was known for its edgier, more hardcore style of professional wrestling, which included extreme and high-risk matches. This diverged from the more mainstream, family-friendly approach that the WWE traditionally favoured. McMahon may have had reservations about aligning his company's image too closely with the extreme nature of ECW, so why the fuck did he buy it? ECW faced significant financial difficulties during its initial run, ultimately leading to its closure in 2001. McMahon did acquire the assets of the promotion, including its video library, and sought to revive the brand 5 years later. However, the financial instability of ECW may have made McMahon cautious about fully embracing and investing in the brand that had seemingly struggled to make money. So why did he buy it then? As the chairman and owner of WWE, McMahon is known for maintaining a high level of creative control over the company. The ECW brand, even in its revived form, represented a departure from McMahon's established vision for professional wrestling. This might have led to some reluctance in fully embracing ECW and its unique style and presentation. There's many specific stories about Paul Heyman clashing with Stephanie McMahon over their creative visions backstage. So why did he buy it? This unique blend of hardcore wrestling, edgy storylines, and unparalleled athleticism. However, despite its initial success, a series of challenges ultimately led to ECW's demise. During its rise, ECW stood out as a beacon of innovation. It introduced a gritty and realistic style of wrestling that resonated with a generation hungry for an alternative to the mainstream offerings of WWE and WCW. ECW showcased a roster of talented performers, many of whom would go on to become household names in the industry. The promotion's unapologetic embrace of violence and adult-orientated content provided a stark contrast to the more sanitized product of its competitors, attracting a dedicated fanbase that craved an edgier form of entertainment. Despite its popularity, however, ECW faced numerous financial and operational challenges that ultimately contributed to its downfall. The promotion struggled with limited financial resources. In addition, ECW faced legal battles and controversies. Recognizing the popularity of the hardcore and edgy aesthetic, these larger promotions lured away ECW's top stars, leaving the promotion scrambling to rebuild its roster on more than one occasion. This exodus of talent, coupled with mounting financial difficulties, ultimately proved insurmountable, and the original ECW was gone by 2001, even if they did try to keep it going over the next 2 decades. All I can tell you is 25 years later, people are still saying ECW at shows. It gives me goosebumps. It's amazing that all these years later the fans still remember ECW and chant it at shows. It will never die. However, while ECW may have fallen, its impact on the wrestling industry is undeniable. The promotion's influence can be seen in the way that pro wrestling is presented today, with a greater emphasis on violence, athleticism, a more diverse range of characters, and a willingness to push the boundaries of storytelling.